Of our profile of this 64-year-old whirlwind is particularly apt, for we filmed it in Russia, the site of his latest venture. When a black Chaika sedan like this one is seen tooling through the streets of Moscow, it's best not to inquire just who is within. Certainly official, possibly KGB. It is wisest to give it the widest berth. Not so with this Chaika. There are no idle moments in the life of Peter Ustinov. If there is an audience, there will be a performance. Peter Ustinov is a European cocktail. Both parents were half Russian and parts German, French, and Italian. He was conceived in Russia, born in Britain. Educated to be a proper English gentleman, instead became an actor at 17, a star at 18, a playwright at 19, and a producer at 20, and at 21, a private in the British Army. His commander noted, "On no account is this man to be put in charge of others." Being in charge of all those Ustinovs was enough. Inside that jolly head lurk 100 goofy characters.
What are you doing? You are picking up a dime? You are vice president of Guatemala now. You don't to pick up a dime. See?
How do you make a Russian sound in English?
Well, that's very easy, because very soft. You know, like his colleagues said to me every morning, "Good morning, good morning." I said to him, of course, good morning, because I wish to be polite. And everything is soft like that, so then when they take the telephone and say, "Hello?" "Hello." Oh, there you are. He's laughing now because he recognizes what I'm saying, big truth.
Big truth, not comedy or fiction, is the purpose of Ustinov in Russia. He is here making a 6-part documentary on the history of Russia, his view of it, adapted from a book he wrote called My Russia. It is a gargantuan task to reduce the mystery of this universe of a country to the plain language of television.
If China was awesome because of her huge population, Russia was awesome by virtue of its enormous size. I mean, the United States and Canada, huge countries both, have 4 and 4.5 time zones respectively. The Soviet Union has 11 of them and covers more than 1/6 of the Earth's surface.
Ustinov and his crew have traveled all over the country in every season, with, of course, Soviet cooperation. They hope to sell the broadcast all over the world, including the Soviet Union. It is Ustinov's view that through history, the Russians have good reason to be suspicious of the West. They are more the misunderstood, even eccentric empire than they are the evil empire.
This calm consideration of the Russians that you make in your book and are making in your television program has not won you a lot of friends in the West. There's been a lot of criticism of the book that you've done a kind of an apologia for the Russians.
I think that's the result of an appalling lack of self-confidence in the West, if you don't mind my saying so. I've known some of these rather hysterical comments from people that should really have known better, and it has proved to me how right I am. We get the impression, you know, when reading these reports of either from our press or from theirs here, that people spend their whole time thinking about politics and talking about politics, which is absolutely untrue.
Yet, in its own way, Ustinov's history is quite political and quite blinkered. Not just to Soviet imperialism, but to their abuses of the Russian people. His Soviets are well-meaning but blundering social experimenters who act the way they act only because they feel so threatened.
I think the Russians themselves regard us with considerable suspicion and considerable fear. And I think there's really more historical justification for their attitude than ours. After all, they've been invaded far more frequently than they have themselves invaded. One forgets that there have been major invasions of Russia in 1812 and after the end of the First World War, when there were British, French, Canadian, American, and Japanese troops on Russian soil trying to overthrow the Soviet government at its inception. Now, we've forgotten all that. It's never taught in our schools, at least not in mine, because defeats were not popular with small boys. In point of fact, Russia has always been considered an enemy in peace, a potential enemy in peacetime, and has practically always been an ally in war.
For his documentary, the Russians provided some of the Soviet Union's most celebrated actors, who took the parts of some of the giants of Russian history. Peter the Great, and Tolstoy, and Ivan the Terrible.
Caesar!
Ustinov shambles through that history as an inquiring reporter, with Ivan
Caesar of what?
as a terrified reporter.
Caesar, of all the Russias.
A splendid array of Russia's past was made available to him. Stalin, of course, was touched on, but definitely not portrayed. Old palaces and country houses were opened up, and as seriously as he takes his work, he is the writer and the star of this series, there is always the slightly lunatic Ustinov being unsuccessfully subdued.
If it wished for a struggle, it only had to continue along its chosen path. Boom, boom, boom. Da 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 da. That's the way all war films begin. Terrible, terrible cliches.
The Russia of Ustinov's tour is a country that has changed extraordinarily in only the past few years. Every visitor notices it. A lot of the grayness has gone out of the landscape. Clothes and cars and people have a little more flair. People seem as dour and suspicious as ever, but there is a sense of possibilities.
I think already the arrival of Gorbachev has made an enormous difference, because they were so used to these geriatric cases, one after the other, that in one day, I would put it this way, Gorbachev gave them someone to weep for if he should suddenly die. And I think it gives a kind of personality to the leadership, and a personality which is experienced for the first time in what other people are like. Where the Russians are absolutely deplorable is in public relations. They have no sense of it whatsoever at a period in which everybody else gives the impression of sometimes having nothing else but that. I did a film for UNESCO, which was a Christmas greeting thing from all sorts of people. And there was a wonderful sequence, which I wish had been shown more, of Brezhnev with his granddaughter sitting on his knee. And the granddaughter was bored stiff. And he was trying to concentrate at the same time, trying to keep her in order, which was one of the most human and wonderful things. He was talking like, and he went on like that with his divided attention, which, if it had been more widely diffused, would have melted hearts, because it was a grandfather who was seeming to say even, do this to your father, but not to your grandfather, not on television. It was wonderful.
How Russian are you?
Well, I feel I understand them very well. If you treat them with openness, they will tend to treat you with openness.
I described Russia the other day as a pill in which the sugar's in the middle. Because many people get put off by this austere outside and the questioning outside, and almost a look of hunting dogs. It's almost an accusing, very pale look you get occasionally, but it means absolutely nothing. It's very affectionate on the whole.
What about the restrictions on people? I mean, why will they not let people who want to leave, leave?
I think they regard the country, and I've heard this several times from authoritative people, as an enormous laboratory
in which they are trying out a huge social experiment which is not yet finished. And I think that they feel they're onto something. They feel their system is the best possible, and they feel that eventually, when it all works perfectly, they'll have something to teach. They are people who have put on their door the traditional little thing you get in hotels saying, please do not disturb. But I don't see why one has to take it so seriously as to call this an evil empire, which it patently is not.
Ustinov is quite celebrated in the Soviet Union. Soviet writers seek him out at his hotel, among them a poet named Ustinov, a distant cousin of his. Of his great literary output, only selected works are published in Russian. When a play of his is performed, it attracts an enormous audience. Whatever the Russians may be, they have a great appetite for the arts. The arts are almost a substitute for religion. The Moscow Philharmonic and its conductor have the status we give rock stars.
There is extraordinary reverence for the arts in this country. Why is that, do you think?
Well, my great-uncle, who was one of the founders of the Russian ballet, called it an attitude of piety towards the arts. They regard talent as something quite exceptional and coming from nowhere they can explain. And also, there is a general fear of the influence of the artist, to the extent that he's sometimes put into prison or worse. The fate of Solzhenitsyn was one thing, but the fate of Dostoevsky under the Tsars was really rather worse. Dostoevsky was arrested for reading subversive material and sent to Siberia for 4 years and into the army for another 8, wasting 12 years of his life. Lenin suffered internal exile on several occasions and was sent to Siberia.
Why do they brutalize themselves so much?
They don't really brutalize themselves. I think that you could get a terrible, unimaginative police inspector saying, if we hadn't have done that to Dostoevsky, where would Crime and Punishment be? I feel responsible for that fine book. You know, you can...
Easy for him to say.
Easy for him to say. I'm not suggesting he's right for a moment, but...
But what I'm getting at in Soviet Union, no one would doubt the Russianness of a Sakharov or a Solzhenitsyn. What was their sin?
I think the reason, if you can put this all in terms of a school, that certain boys are punished because they should have known better. And if you're an author, you should have known better than to do that, instead of having a free spirit and writing whatever you like. In the long run, they appreciate the free spirit more. I saw a wonderful Russian film the other day, wonderful film. I said, what's going to happen to this film? Because it had engendered some opposition, like anything wonderful anywhere. And they said, we don't know yet. It'll either be quietly withdrawn from the cinemas or it'll win the Lenin Prize. Well, this is the answer to everything. But in point of fact, it's not so very far from us.
It is, of course, a million miles from us, which is why so many of the freer Russian spirits not unlike Peter Ustinov's, either leave or try to leave. Ustinov, whose own talent thrives in the uncontrolled, haphazard garden of Western culture, is perhaps rather too kind to a system that will not allow such freedom of expression. Perhaps it's his own Russianness getting in the way of his objectivity. Perhaps this hugely talented man has a weak spot after all. But that's a problem for Ustinov, the historian. The other Ustinov, all those other Ustinovs remain a delight to all the senses.
Can't shoot here. Can't shoot here.
Very bad.